Well, welcome everyone. I'm Danielle with Evoke Changes Outdoors nonprofit, and we're here today with a couple of attendees of the trips that we've hosted over the past year. Some of the main highlights or main events that we've hosted are 2 veteran trips and 1 first responder trip at this point. In January, we hosted a trip called Blast and Cast for Wellness, which was a duck hunting and fishing trip down in South Texas. And then in the summer, we hosted a trip called Respond to Wellness for first responders that was held in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. And then just recently, we actually hosted a veterans hunt over in eastern Montana called Wellness in the Wild. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us and kind of speak about your experience. I want to go around the table and give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Let us know specifically what trip you were on and any service role or experience that you'd like to share about yourself. Ty, do you want to start us off?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Ty Haggard. I am a paramedic and a firefighter out of Ashland, Oregon, and I was part of the Respond to Wellness trip in the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for joining us on that. Brandon, what about you? Tell us about you.
My name is Brandon Martinez. I was just on the Veterans Wellness Hunt in eastern Montana, hunting whitetail doe.
Awesome. And Carl?
I'm Carl Amerson. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I was part of the Blast and Cast back in January down in Baffin Bay, Texas. And yeah.
Awesome. Yes, all were such fun, memorable trips. And although you guys might have been doing different things, there were definitely some consistent elements. Like you guys might recall the adventure journal that everyone got. So there was definitely some consistencies in that. Ty, when you were originally registering for the trip, what did you expect about the experience?
Yeah, so I was thinking about that. I didn't really have high expectations. Wellness is kind of this thing that like everyone talks about, but there's not really I don't know a single person who's got like a consistent definition with somebody else's of like what the act of working towards wellness means. So in this Respond to Wellness trip, I knew we'd be hiking. I knew we'd be outdoors. I know I love the outdoors. So I had that. But as far as what I was expecting from the wellness portion of it or the main portion, I just knew that I was probably going to need to have an open mind because it was either I figured that it was for first responders. So it wasn't going to be too far into the, I don't know the best way to put it, but like the kind of lovey-dovey, I figured if it's centered toward first responders, we're probably not going to be too far into that. And we're probably also not going to just totally ignore everything like most of us first responders do when we get together. So I'm going to come in with an open mind. And I tried not to have too many expectations other than that to have an expectation to participate.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then after the experience, what did it end up being for you?
Oh man, it was really, really awesome. First of all, the setting is just that hike in Montana there is just so beautiful that like it's hard not to just like feel better and more complete and more well after spending 5 days in that environment. But when I think about really what it was, I think that it put some things into motion that I already knew that I needed to do. The journaling that you mentioned and the adventure journal that was there as a guided thing. It's like I had gotten away from doing some of that. And so also it ended up being an opportunity for me to kind of dig a little deeper and take the time for reflection as far as what was actually going on in my life and where my stresses were coming from and things like that. So it was a little bit more discovery than I thought. I kind of had this idea that I would go there and be able to work on what was happening in my life, but it ended up being a little bit more discovery. And the biggest thing that it ended up being was like an opportunity to connect with people. And that was something that I figured would be there, but it was never really in the forefront of my mind until after the trip. And that ended up being like the main thing there was the connection between all the people and you guys and everyone there.
That's awesome. You know, as like coordinators of this stuff, we have, of course, like an outline of what we hope to accomplish, but you never know what people are going through and what their particular place in life might pick up from it. So it's always so wonderful to hear, you know, those personal insights that the attendees have. And so thank you for sharing your experience on that.
Absolutely.
Brandon, what did you expect walking into the experience of that Eastern Montana hunt?
I did not know what to expect going into it. It was going to be my first hunt. I'd killed a bird and a rabbit prior, so this is going to be my first basically mammal. Definitely cute little thing walking around. I was definitely knew that it was going to be, I was kind of at odds with myself at the beginning whether or not I was even going to be able to pull the trigger. So I'd always been raised, I was raised by a single mom, and I know talking to her growing up, she was like, I don't think you could ever kill anything. Like, I don't think that that's you. So I always had that going through my head. And I drove from Washington out there, so I had plenty of time to kind of anticipate everything that was going to be happening. And I think I had a little bit of an idea. I knew it was going to be hard work. I knew it was probably going to be one of the hardest things that I'd done. And the only thing that I was expecting it to be really cold. And I think it kind of all got hit in the face by me because I was planning on starting hunting Monday and I ended up getting in Sunday afternoon, and Sean and I went out that Sunday for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and not 20 minutes into the trail, I was staring eye to eye with a buck, maybe 60 yards away through binoculars. And I definitely got a little bit of buck fever just looking through the binos, started getting those shakes. And at that point, like the 12 hours of what I thought I was going to be walking into completely just was out the window. And it was kind of just starting everything from scratch.
That's pretty cool. Well, that's awesome. Sometimes that shift in what you anticipate can really open you up to just, you know, going with the flow a little bit more. And as you reflect back, you know, towards the end of the trip, what did it all end up being for you?
It ended up being much more than I think I ever thought I would have taken from this. I'm a pretty open-minded guy, and I try to kind of go against what most like first responders and military and all that go against, of like try to not talk about your feelings and all that. So over the last 2 years, I think since I've got out, basically, I've been trying to not hide everything that I'm thinking and try to be more communicative to like my family and friends and whatnot. So going out there, I'd say that by the end of it, as what Ty said, I believe, the friends that I made there were awesome, but I also got to reconnect with an old friend that I actually hadn't seen for 2 years. So a friend that got me into riding motorcycles and doing a couple other things that I love in my life. He was up stationed with me in Alaska, and he's actually one of the veterans that joined us on the wellness hunt with me. So I originally was going there. I knew I had a friend already established. I knew Sean, so I wasn't too worried about, you know, kind of being the odd man out or something like that. But the teamwork aspect of it, I think a lot of things from the military that I learned all got brought up, and it doesn't matter. I think Ty was talking about as well. He had 4 first responders there, so he already knows what type of people they are. They're not going to be super soft, and they're probably going to be leaning towards not wanting to do anything at all, which just knowing that gives you that comfort. So just knowing that there's going to be another 3 responders there, you know, you're going to be able to fit in and all you guys are going to get along. And first day when we had our other 2 veterans come in, everyone was getting along right away because it's just that brother camaraderie. And throughout the trip, I think I felt more of that military camaraderie that I was told I was going to get while I was in the service. I felt it more out hunting with those 4 veterans, including myself, than I did ever in the service. So it kind of gave me, the relationships and stuff that you take from the service, I just feel like pretty much every one of these trips you can kind of take that. It's kind of like when you go to a new base and you get stationed there, you bring these friends with you, and maybe you might see them for a month or a year, and after that you might never see them again. this is kind of just a short-term basis for that. I met 2 amazing people while I was there, and now when I go to San Antonio and stuff, I always have friends. And yeah, I think the last thing was just, it showed me that was the most I've ever hiked in my life, hands down. I think we probably hiked 70 miles in 7 days, or at least I did. And there's just a few times during the trip where I was really telling myself just one foot in front of the other, like, just, you can do this, you can do this. And I wanted to give up a lot towards those end days where my feet were freaking tired and it was been cold the whole week. And once we did get one of the veterans that came with us his first whitetail, that kind of put everything that you guys are doing in perspective. And after he killed that deer, I had no want to even kill a deer after that, because the fulfillment that, like, what Evoke Changes is supposed to be about is helping people that are usually people who are too afraid to get help, to be honest. And it was just him and I out there when we killed that deer. And yeah, the emotional connection that me and that gentleman have after just spending 2 hours out there together, and the stuff that he shared with me is just kind of just put everything in perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear your experience. It's interesting how you brought up a couple layers, in the sense that, you know, when you do go into the service, or you're a first responder, you have this group of people focused towards this mission that, I mean, there's zero doubt you're going to have a deeper bond. And then sometimes it can be really, really hard to recreate that when you're trying to integrate back into society or going into your day-to-day life. And it can be rare sometimes for people to find those opportunities. And that was definitely a goal of ours, was to try and recreate some sort of environment where that could potentially happen. So I love hearing that that was an opportunity for you. And I thought it was also interesting how you tapped into this idea that we have these groups that are essentially special personalities, like dedicated to serving and helping others. You know, that's what we see as a common thread with veterans and first responders. And yet it is very much in that culture to not ask for help themselves, or, you know, to kind of take on that weight. So, and not show that weight that you might be carrying, for many reasons, most likely. But it's just pretty amazing, and really warms my heart to hear when there are those opportunities for people who have such a heart of service, you know, getting a chance for them to really refill their cup or pay attention to themselves. So thank you for sharing your experiences on that. Well, Carl, what about you? What did you expect to experience on that duck hunting and fishing trip in Texas?
So with a lot of the prior nonprofit work that I've done, I helped do troop reunions. And so I was kind of expecting something along the lines of those. Now there's, of course, camaraderie, because all those guys serve together. But within those reunions, there are some programs as far as it felt more kumbaya-ish. And Sean and I have talked about extensively, and there's one that there was a lot of unnecessary stuff. So going into this, when Sean called me and told me about everything going on, and I thought, okay, you know, it'll probably be like one of the reunions. You know, we all kind of get together and shoot ducks and hunt fish, or, you know, something. Or maybe, I don't know, I'm not the most avid hunter or fisherman. I suck at fishing, but, you know, I figured just go out there and have a good time for the weekend. And yeah, but it turned out to be this amazing weekend where we got to just shut our brains off. Got to meet, you know, you for the first time. Been a lot of Sean's extended family, his brother Bo, his wife, their grandson. They're all really great people. And so it kind of really helped take a lot of that kind of pressure off of, you know, whenever I go fishing or hunting, especially in a group, if I go by myself, I don't really care. I'm just out there to, you know, throw in a line and kind of get drunk. But if it's with a group, there's kind of this, I guess, competition, I guess, especially because you got a bunch of guys. The other 3 guys, they were all older, retired. And they were all Air Force, me being the only Marine out there. And so it was odd man out and, all that. But, still a great group of guys. We just got to turn our brains off, and Bo and Sean and, out there with the decoys and with his dog, and like both of them were out there with their dogs, and it was great. Like we got to catch some fish and shoot some ducks, and afterwards we all just kind of sat around and hung out and talked, and it was great. So.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how when you have that like activity, how helpful it can be to just kind of break down some of those barriers, and like you said, get that chance to kind of shut your brain off and any overthinking that you might have going on, and you can just focus on that experience that's happening right in front of you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Ty, what was there any moment in particular or any experience that stood out to you most?
Most is hard. There's a lot, but I'd say the thing that comes to mind is, we talk about the outdoors and a lot of what you guys do. There was not hunting and fishing associated directly with the trip that I was on, but just like that process of going from this hike that we were going to do to when you guys showed up at Sierra's house, and Sean was like, "Hey, does anyone want to fish?" I'm like, "Well, I couldn't find the reel." He's like, "I got a fly rod right here." Like he just tossed it over to me. And so that really stood out to me. It's just like, oh, this is going to be really, really fun. Like I was really excited for the opportunity to integrate the fishing in with the trip as well. And so I took as much advantage of Sean's knowledge and his time that he was willing to give with any of that fly fishing stuff as possible. So that's something that definitely stood out for me. Number one, just like Sean's gregarious personality comes in. He's like, "Hey man, anyone want to fish?" I'm like, "Yeah, I didn't get a rod. I didn't really know what to get. I didn't know, and he's just like, "Oh, I got a fly rod right here." Just like tossed it over. It was just like, so like that kind of set the stage for me for the type of connection that we were all going to have. And so that stands out. And then the fishing integration into that trip, especially considering most people weren't there for any hunting or fishing or anything like that, I think was really, really awesome. It was really cool for me to, number one, learn all those things. Number two, to watch Sean work and his like giddiness and like becoming a little kid again. He taught all 5 of the attendees. He got us to catch at least one fish a piece, whether they wanted to or not. It was like really, really fun to watch, and to see how valuable and even therapeutic that process was. I think we had an attendee who mentioned like, "Man, this is the first fish that I caught since I was like 3 years old." We're catching 6 or 8 inch brook trout, but just the process of like hopping in and like, I don't know if I want to do it or not, and then like hop in, catches a fish, and like you could just see I was there for that moment when he was like, "Man, this is the first fish I caught since I was 3." He relived this childhood moment that was obviously really special to him. And so that created an opportunity to make more connections. So for me, the biggest thing that stood out is that like the way that we were able to weave together kind of all the different elements of this trip. And then also is like, hey, there happens to be a stream here we could fish, and like how well that fit in to something that wasn't necessarily on the itinerary, but I think ended up being a very valuable part of the trip. I know probably the most valuable for me, but I think everybody in our group probably saw some value in that or got something out of it in some way that was therapeutic. So I'd say that's the thing that stands out to me the most.
Yeah, and you might have not seen outwardly that marketing of fishing, but I'll tell you, it was definitely on Sean's itinerary.
Yeah, for sure.
And he'll even admit, like, he just loves seeing the joy in people catch fish even more than he enjoys fishing himself sometimes. I mean, he's an avid fisherman, so of course he loves it. He's all about it, but that appreciation of seeing someone try something new or step outside their comfort zone or even surprise themselves, with what they can do is absolutely a huge reason why he loves integrating that. And yeah, it is so amazing also to see how that activity can really challenge people. I mean, sometimes it's not super easy, and there is a little bit of a technique and kind of focus, and we have to learn something new sometimes, which can be a little bit uncomfortable. And so it was pretty cool opportunity to see people's, not so much defenses break down, but their willingness to like open up,
Well, yeah, and as you're learning something from someone, you get the hang. There's also that time at the bank, where you're casting or you're waiting. It's like, okay, yeah, you got the cast, do that for a while, and then there's just an opportunity to just connect. And so that's something that I really loved about the trip in general, was the ways that the connection and like kind of the therapy wellness portion of it it was not as separated as I expected. I noticed, like, it's a tip of the hat to both you and to Sean, but I found myself in the trip noticing, like, oh, like I just happened to be over here, like, and Sean's like, hey, what's up, man? And we're just, talking, but he was definitely guiding it that way. And we were having a conversation, but it felt so natural. And that's one of the things that I realized, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be this separate thing. And it's just because, like, I realized that was the genesis for the conversation, doesn't mean that Sean and I weren't legitimately building a friendship, or you and I weren't legitimately sharing things about our lives with each other. That was actually really truly what was happening. But there is a huge therapeutic element of that. And that's something that I've taken back and started to try to integrate with the guys in my fire department that I work with as the firefighter wellness guy, is like, hey, we don't have to make a big thing of this. Like, I can just sit down with you and be like, hey man, how are you? Or ask a specific question about your family. And that kind of just gets the thing going. And so the fishing and the time in between casts and the walking to the spot and everything is a great opportunity for people to make those connections and break down those walls a little bit, so that when it comes time to like have a guided or a purposeful conversation, it's a lot easier to get to that.
Yeah. You bring up a pretty like pivotal component, to these trips, which is that we have this general itinerary, which might seem like the mission, but it's simply the vehicle, for the real mission, which is that opportunity to connect and communicate, and exactly like you said, build those relationships. Yeah, very cool, Ty. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. How about you, Brandon? Was there any particular moment about the trip that stood out to you most?
I'd say the singular moment that stood out the most was definitely when John and I were by ourselves and he took down that white-tailed deer. But it wasn't so much as the moment of itself, but all of the kind of like tools that we built that I'm using now. And I'd say the biggest takeaway is kind of not the singular moment, but all the things that I've been realizing over the last week, since I'm still kind of like processing everything that happened, because there's just so much that went on and I learned so much while I was there. But just proving to myself that, I mean, you can do something even though you might not think you're capable of it. Because when we were there, John had missed the first couple of shots on the doe, and he had looked at me in between it, and I could just see that he was completely fogged and shaken up, and he didn't think that he could do it. And I kind of just patted him on the chest and I just told him, we're here for this. It's okay if you miss, like, there'll be plenty more deer. And that next shot, it was a heart shot, and the deer dropped right in front of us. And in that moment, it was a lot for him, but little did he didn't know that he could do that, I think. And he didn't really realize that, but it actually showed me that I could do it, because I had this gentleman there that really did not have any faith that he could have done this stuff, yet he was just down to deer in front of my eyes. And I was going there being as motivated as possible, and I was still in doubt of myself. So that kind of gave me the final push to be able to say, like, you know, if you take that next step or you just hike that one night next ridge or whatever, you might get lucky. And lo and behold, 20 minutes before final shooting light on the last day, I mean, I pushed myself harder than I ever have before. I ended up killing my first deer. And yeah, I think the biggest thing is probably staying on like a single track mind was the biggest thing that I took. When everyone's working for the same goal and everyone knows exactly what that goal is, it's really easy for everyone to mesh together. And that therapeutic things, like the therapeutic side of things that you guys are really trying to hit, the like nail on the head, I understand why you guys are taking people so far out of their comfort zones, because when everyone's on the same track mind, all that talking and everything is just kind of, like you said, it's very natural and it's in the background. And it's not so much that you're talking to someone who's maybe trying to help you. It's just an honest conversation. You guys are both trying to help each other.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that.
I think that's the biggest thing would just be, you know, like proving myself that I could do something. And then having that one track mind can help pretty much everything in life. I know just today was the first day I had been on the oars on a drift boat in a while. And the way that I was feeling the water and reading the water was different than I ever have on a drift boat. And I could tell that was directly taken from the hunting trip, because no matter what I'm doing, I usually have something else going on in my head. And today was like one of the few days where I could really like have my mindset on one goal, and that was rowing at that time. And I could feel more than I ever have before.
That's awesome. Isn't that amazing how the serenity that can come from being so focused on the moment and really, you know, tuned into those details of what you're doing and what's going on right there in front of you.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think perseverance is definitely what you guys show.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting too when it's so interesting to see how people face that failure sometimes, you know, especially on the hunts, because it can be a bummer and defeating, and you really get to see a lot of that self-talk, you know, come out from people. And at the same token, it makes that success like so much sweeter and so much more impacting, you know, and reassuring in many ways.
Yeah, it was interesting. The gentleman that or my friend that I had brought up, that was from Alaska, stationed with me, he actually left on Friday afternoon at 11 o'clock, and at 3 p.m. that same day is when I killed that other veteran, that doe.
Wow.
So if he had just waited one more afternoon, that probably would have been his deer. And he kind of just was like, look, we haven't seen any deer all week. I got to make it back to work by Monday. Instead of just killing myself and driving 12 hours, I'm going to do one more. I'm going to take one day extra and just take it easy. And I no regrets on anything, but it just shows like if you'd have just stayed literally just 4 more hours and just worked that little bit more, he probably would have gone home with the full cooler. And I know it's not the point is filling up the freezer, but that we just spent 7 or 6 days or whatever push. Yeah, it is. So a lot worse than going. I'm assuming going home empty-handed and then seeing us kill that next day would have been a little bit of a heartbreak.
Yeah. Well, and it does, I mean, like you said, it's not necessarily like the main intention, but one of the intentions is to create that sense of purpose. And you better believe bringing home a cooler full of meat can really fill, you know, that sense of purpose and being able to provide, or, you know, basically seeing the fruits of your work. And so although it might not be like the main goal, it still is extremely like reassuring and encouraging, and can definitely give you that like boost of confidence.
Yeah, it was great.
Awesome, Brandon. Thank you for sharing. Well, Carl, what about you? Was there any particular moment or piece of the trip that stood out to you most?
So that Saturday night, like what Ty had talked about, where you know, the connection and wellness of it. After dinner, there was this, like, everybody was so much on the same page as far as where we all were mentally. that after dinner, it was just this absolute calm. It was peaceful. Like we sat there, we had the fire going, and we all had a cigar. Well, some of us anyways. But it was just that moment right there that you can tell that everybody was on that same page. Everybody was in the exact same mindset of absolute peace and serenity. And that was absolutely perfect. Like out of everything that happened that day. I mean, I'm pretty sure being tired kind of played into it between Mark falling in the really muddy waters of the bay and you know, you get our waders full of water because we fell in or something. But yeah, but that was the perfect moment for me that stood out.
Oh, well, I really appreciate hearing that, you know, and it's amazing that we're able to accomplish those moments, you know, like you've made a comment about how you're used to maybe doing these things and drinking beer, and, you know, kind of that's actually a really big thing that we've noticed, is that not only in society is there that encouragement of drinking alcohol to decompress, but it really is sometimes an expectation, especially when you're doing things like this. And all of our trips are, you know, no alcohol, specifically like during the main portion of the trips. And once they're over, you know, what you do on your own towards the end of it after our closing ceremony is, you know, your choice. But when there is that, you know, multi-day experience where, you know, Sean is involved, we don't have alcohol involved in those trips. And for some, it can be very challenging. And, you know, that has been communicated to us, which we completely expect. And, you know, Sean himself is a recovering alcoholic. And so he absolutely relates to that desire and habituation to having that to decompress. And so honestly, we've just felt so grateful that that extra work and that challenge has allowed some space for people to decompress without alcohol. And, you know, we would hope that it kind of challenges their preset notions about decompression or about being able to relax. So I really just love hearing that, you know, that moment stood out to you specifically, and there wasn't that focus on alcohol necessarily to accomplish that.
Yeah. And I think that's what made it better, is that we didn't have to have some kind of mind altering substance in order to even really do that.
Yeah.
Especially because I know if a lot of veterans, when they get out, they miss that camaraderie, they feel disassociated, they feel that self depersonalization behind it. And so like I was one of them. I turned to alcohol, and I mean, I don't need it. And so that weekend, I don't need it anymore, let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that weekend of it being, you know, alcohol free, and yeah, absolutely. And I think it was even better for that, because if alcohol had been involved, best case scenario is we sit around drinking and probably don't even remember, you know, and I'd much rather leave with the memories of that weekend. So
Yeah, it's interesting because alcohol can, you know, a lot of people claim that a reason that they have it in their life is that, you know, looseness that it might bring, that ability to, you know, not be in your head and easier to kind of escape that tension from day-to-day life. And at the same token, you know, from more of a therapeutic standpoint, it gets a little bit harder for people to get more in touch with like what's going on inside of them. And sometimes that feeling is really uncomfortable. You know, once we start turning inwards, it's not something we necessarily want to sit with. And that's another reason why why it's very common, you know, for people to integrate drinking into their lives. And so we just hope to create an opportunity, you know, to challenge that. And we know that not everyone has problems with alcohol or is challenged with alcohol, but a big goal is to at least create an environment for people where they feel some sense of safety and security to turn inward, even if there is some discomfort going on there. And, you know, being able to kind of move through that, which, we have heard of some attendees really having a struggle and working on through these trips. So that is a big part of it too. You know, for us, we see that as an opportunity to be there with them, and kind of like you mentioned, Carl, hope to show some opportunity of not needing alcohol, yet still experiencing that ease and that relaxation and ability to connect.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Ty, do you mind elaborating a little bit more on the role that the outdoors has played in your life?
Yeah. So, right now, I'm at a spot in my life right now where the outdoors is super important. It's an opportunity for me to challenge myself. And by that, I mean, I grew up playing your traditional sports. So I was a super athletic. I was always playing some sport, multiple sports, one practice to the next and everything like that. So I didn't really grow up with the outdoors the way that I'm experiencing it now. I didn't do a lot of hunting or fishing. I had some exposure, but it wasn't something that was ever very important to anybody who was in my life. And so it just was never something that was important to me as a result. I'm one of probably the many of like Joe Rogan hunting converts, you know, so he started getting into that and I'm listening to the podcast, and I live in an excellent area for hunting and fishing. In Southern Oregon here, I'm 10 minutes to the mountains. I can throw my pole or my rifle and be at a river or in the woods, you know, there's so much opportunity where I'm at, just to get out. So I kind of took on that thing of like, I'm going to be an adult convert to this outdoors thing, you know, and without really very many people I know as mentors. I know a lot of people who are really into hunting and fishing and just being outside and everything like that. But I don't know a lot of people to the level where they're going to take me along and like kind of show me something. And a lot of what I have is like an opportunity to just watch a lot of YouTube and things like that. So this process has been, you know, for me, I'd say like the last 6 or 8 years, I've spent really trying to just integrate, not dive in head first or anything, but just start to kind of pick things up and get outside. And I've seen so much how like beneficial that is for my life, and the time that I get to spend out there and doing that, and the connections that I have made with people and hunting partners and fishing partners, and like the connections that get made there. And those have become some of the most important connections that I have in my life now. And so it's the last 6 or 8 years the outdoors has played a really, really big part in my life. And especially coming back from the trip with you guys, and that I came back, I told my wife, I was just kind of like, I always kind of had this idea it'd have to be this huge production, or I'd need all this stuff that was going to be really, really expensive or anything like that. And so just being able to get a part of that and be like, oh, I already have this base level of skills. Like really, like I just needed to like see this come together. I needed some mentorship on this. And so like I came home, I told my wife, I'm like, I'm going to pick you up a backpack. We're getting out there, just me and you, you know, we're going to do it. So bought a jet boy, you know, a couple little things, but I felt totally equipped for that. Whereas before it just kind of wasn't something that was on my radar. Camping was like kind of your standard tent camping in something like that. And so we've identified all these spots. We've got out on the Pacific Crest Trail for a night and found a little spot, and we've identified these trips that we want to do backpacking together. So that's helped, like just as a side shoot, it's that the trip that I went on with you guys has kind of opened my eyes to another part of the outdoors. And so it's allowed for me to have the outdoors become an even larger portion of what's really, really important to me. And also to like strengthen my marriage and my relationship with my wife, and the planning of that has been really fun. And so she's really wanting to integrate into that. We're talking about like, you know, trying to find a couple of our friends that are married and have them come along with us and just kind of make it so yeah, it's a very, very important part of my life, especially over the last 6 to 8 years or so.
That's awesome. That's really awesome to hear that you've been willing to kind of take that initiative to teach yourself about, you know, hunting specifically, that can be really, really challenging. I mean, Sean had voiced
Yeah.
to me when he first moved to Montana how hard it was to find people to go out with and show him areas, and he ended up doing a lot on his own, which can be sometimes can be discouraging, you know, especially
There's a
if you
lot of
haven't,
failures.
yeah, especially if you haven't been raised and it's that
Yeah.
new, you know. So I really commend you for just taking the initiative to stick with it. And that's great to hear that you and your wife are looking at going outdoors as an opportunity and something that you're willing to integrate into your lives more regularly.
Yeah, it's been fun.
That's awesome, Ty. Thanks for sharing. Well, Brandon, what has the outdoors played in your life?
The outdoors have played a huge role in my life over the last 7 years, probably. I grew up with a single mom who's working all the time, so I did a lot of sports and like bike riding and all that stuff, but never handful of fishing trips and stuff with the grandparents. But I think that was more so for my grandpa to get away from my grandma. So it was never so much about the outdoors so much as the silence. So that was kind of like my introduction to outside, was like, yeah, we go to the lake and throw in the fishing poles and you don't talk, otherwise you're going to scare away the fish. I'm like, okay. So lo and behold, I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas. So there's desert out there. There's not much animals or fishing to go on. And lo and behold, I got stationed in Anchorage, Alaska for my first base. And up there is pretty much you go outside or you stay inside. There's not really another option. There's not a city to go to or go to the mall and do all that fun stuff. So I taught myself how to fly fish off YouTube and kind of just hung out on base and kind of got the hang of that. And slowly, as my time up there progressed, I slowly started building up all the tools that you need, which are super expensive for fishing and snowboarding and doing all that outdoor activities. But after those first 2 years up there, I go visit Portland or Seattle or any of these big cities, and I've never felt so out of place. It's a like very interesting thing to see everyone so scared and unhappy in these areas, and then you go to somewhere that's just maybe 3 or 4 hours away that's a little bit more open, and they have a lot more outdoor activities, and the whole vibe of the entire community changes. Everyone's a lot more friendlier. You have people holding open the doors. You go to a city, I mean, everyone knows how the cities are like. And so much so that I'm actually hoping to become a fly fishing guide in Alaska next year, if not the following year for sure. And yeah, I went from, playing 4 or 5 hours of video games through middle school and high school to, I don't have time to play video games anymore. Cause right now I apologize for being in a dark room, but I just got off the water fishing all day. So, definitely the key to my happiness right now, for sure. I couldn't imagine getting it taken away or going back to the life I was living before. And it really does put in perspective. I know it's not for everyone, but I think everyone could take some type of beneficial tool from being outside for some prolonged amount of time. Even if it's the fact that you say that you really know that you don't like being outside, like you can take something from it.
Yeah, I love that you highlighted that difference in really dense urban areas versus areas where there's not much to do except be outside or have some sort of outdoor activity. I mean, that's very much how it is in Montana. You're either indoors all the time and you start getting depressed, especially during the off season and winter, or you're gearing up and getting what you need to get in order to be out and be a part of it. And it really is amazing what just being outdoors can do on its own.
Yeah, living city life my whole life and kind of transitioning over to more outdoor friends, I can say that, most of the people that I associate myself around now are a lot happier. And the more that I take my friends that are from the city that I grew up with out, they become happier. So hopefully the next few years when I go up there, that's kind of my goal, is to get as many people to Alaska as possible from Portland, Oregon. That way they can just be completely thrown to the wolves essentially. And yeah, it just kind of
I'll
makes
join
you
you,
immerse
Brandon.
yourself.
What
Yeah,
was that?
absolutely. Anyone is invited at any time.
Yeah.
Ty, was that you? You said you'll join him?
Yeah. You won't have to pull my leg. I'm there.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you kind of, I mean, sometimes it can be intimidating, like getting the gear or maybe dealing with like that kind of price tag initially of getting what you need to be comfortable outdoors, but it is so worth it and completely changes the experience. And then, kind of like you highlighted, once you get a taste of it, it becomes part of your lifestyle. It becomes part of something that you do want to prioritize and can use to connect with other people. So it's definitely a small price to pay for what you can get out of it.
Yeah, I think it definitely becomes an addiction. Kind of we were talking about, it's hard to go out of the woods, or it's hard to go to the woods for some people without the beer. It's like kind of hard to just not be in the woods.
Yeah, for sure. I think some people have a harder time more than others, but I am married to someone who has that exact mentality, so completely
Yes, you are.
understand. Yeah. Well, Carl, what about you? What role has the outdoors played in your life?
I've always been an outdoors type. I used to go to my great grandfather's farm down in Fashing, Texas. He had 300 acres. I'd go screw around with the cattle. One time, I don't know whose bright idea was to give me a BB gun, but I took off with it, and that's fun at the age of 8. I've always gone hunting or fishing with my grandfather or my dad. And then between love being outdoors, especially when I was in the Marine Corps in Marine combat training, all we did was we spent a month outside fighting, shooting guns, blowing stuff up, hiking everywhere, camping out for the entire month. That was probably the funnest month I've ever had in my life. And then getting stationed in North Carolina, there's a bunch of stuff out there. I used to live in upstate New York, so I would always be up in the hills and tall trees. Even now, my wife and I, we go on primitive camping trips. That's just our way to disconnect, where, we just throw our tent, a bunch of sleeping bags or jet boil, some freeze-dried food and fishing rods, and right in the back of the Jeep, we just take off for a week. We try to do it at least once a year. Now we went to Yellowstone for our 10-year anniversary trip last year.
Wow, congratulations.
Thanks. You have to tell her thank you for putting up with me, but
marriages we put up with each other,
right.
Yeah.
And it's more work for her than me, so but yeah, and we take our kids camping because we want them to love being outdoors too, especially in this day and age where it's easy to bury yourself in a screen between phones and tablets and computers and video games and TV and stuff like that. It's nice to just go outside every once in a while, because that's where you can find me outside the majority of afternoons anyways, where I'm either in my garage or in my neighbor's garage, and we call it our grown man daddy wine sessions, where we just whine and complain about everything going on over a cigar, but we're outside, so that's all that matters.
Nice. Oh, I love hearing that you're kind of like bringing your whole family into that. All of you guys, I love hearing that you're bringing in those around you and those who you love most into that experience too.
Yeah, and I mean, hunting, it's also a very good skill to actually learn, especially if I don't know, just it's something different between store-bought and something that you actually have a respect for, that yes, you did kill it, but you have the meat, you cooked it, stuff like that. And my mom never really understood that part of me. In fact, over Thanksgiving, she lives in the middle of San Antonio in a suburb, and I tried to go deer hunting with a couple of carrots in a K-bar, and she's got a bunch of deer that go in her backyard, and they're not afraid of anybody. So my mom was like freaking out. She was like, "What are you doing? You're gonna kill the buck." I said, "Yeah, I know, that's the point." So
She's like, "No, I've been feeding them for the past year."
Yeah. So, but it's always, fun stuff like that, just to get outside and have a respect for nature and enjoy it. Just, that's my happy place. Mountains, streams, rivers. There's in fact, there's a song by Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist, in this album called Goat Rodeo. There's a song called Attaboy. I listen to that song and it just transports me back there. That is my Zen song, I guess, if you will.
Nice.
So,
I'll have to look into that song.
yeah.
That's awesome. I'll have to figure out what my Zen song would be. I like that idea. Very cool. Well, I want to pose one last question as we start to kind of wrap up our conversation. But Ty, if you were talking to somebody else who was interested in improving their quality of life, what specific piece of advice would you give them?
I think that the first thing that comes to mind, I think all three of us have brought it up tonight, is to just get out of your comfort zone. I think that's the most valuable thing that anybody can do. And, if you have any inclination towards the outdoors, I think that's a great way to go. It's really easy to challenge yourself outside, in outdoor activities. But more than that, just challenge yourself, get outside of your comfort zone. Just getting out and doing something I'd never done before. My experience with you guys on the trip, I came back, like I said, it reconnected me to my journaling. So I kind of picked up a project I had on the back burner and published a firefighter's journal. I've been working with clinicians to bring people in. And so getting challenged in the way that I did on that trip, both physically and, from a wellness standpoint, and being outside of my comfort zone, has really gave me a little bit of a twist in direction. Not that I was off my path or anything like that, but it just kind of reinvigorated my focus. And in this world that we're in, the high speed and how busy everyone is, and the madness of the COVID-19 and what that's done to relationships and things like that, my advice, one piece of advice to anybody that was listening, would be find something to challenge yourself. And it's really easy to find that outside.
I love that. Love that. Thank you so much, Ty, for sharing. Brandon, what about you? If you were chatting with someone who wanted to increase their quality of life, what piece of advice would you give them?
I'd say the piece of advice I'd give them would be, one, that it starts with yourself. I think that's a huge thing that I know I had it. I mean, I'm only 26 years old, so I'm definitely a young guy compared to pretty much everyone I hang around. So I try to use what everyone else's mistakes have been, all your mistakes that you've made, I'm trying to learn from those so I don't have to do it myself. So I think the biggest thing is to kind of find, if you have a problem with yourself, trying to find the root cause of it. So if you're pointing the blame at everyone else, then you're never going to get happy, right? So that'd be the first thing, is actually finding out what you need to do for yourself. And it would probably be just kind of what Ty was talking about, just that perseverance. It'd be to challenge yourself to do something that you never thought you could do and accomplish it. And it doesn't have to be something as crazy. Like for me, it was, I had the opportunity to go on this hunt and do something that I never thought I would have done. And honestly, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do this if it wasn't for you guys. So I wouldn't say, oh, I'm just going to go out there and kill a deer. That's kind of like a very large ambition. It'd be something just as small as, if you can do 50 push-ups or something like that, you know what I mean? Do 51 the next day. And just those baby steps can really start the domino effect, I think. And just like what you're talking about, all of us spent a couple days outside, and Ty starting this journal that he had on the back burner forever. And for me, it's just, when I got back, had like a hard time I've had a hard time having downtime. Like from when you woke up to when you went to bed, when you're hunting, you're either hunting or you're eating or going to bed. And that was it. Now, like TV and all this other stuff that I didn't even really watch before is even more obsolete. So finding that, yeah, just that you need to push that first domino. Whatever's going to make you start that chain reaction is what people need to find out. And first and foremost, you got to be ready to fix yourself. And, you know, if the biggest problem of your life is someone else, then that's not your biggest problem.
Great point. I appreciate what you kind of highlighted there. Thanks so much for sharing, Brandon. Carl, what about you? If you were chatting with someone who wanted to raise their quality of life, what piece of advice would you give them?
Breathe. Only a moment. Take a breath, soak in the environment, no matter where you're at, no matter what you're doing. It just takes a moment. Take a look around, assess everything, whether good, bad. Like, that's one of the first things I do, whether I'm out camping or hunting or in a stressful situation or whatever. You just take a deep breath, look around, soak it in, and kind of comes with a calmness that you're able to kind of make decisions based off that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I specifically resonate greatly with that. I mean, I have breathe tattooed on my wrist because I'm just one of those people where it's like, oh, this is gonna happen and this is gonna happen, and the next thing I know, I'm worried about, you know, 3 steps down the road that hasn't even happened yet. And so I appreciate what the practice of just breathing has done for me. And I love how you tied that into decision making, because you know, it really does help you kind of pull you back into the present.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I resonate with everything you guys have said. And I really appreciate, you know, not only your service towards our communities and our country, but also your willingness to share your experience with me and the viewers, and being open to spend this time to chat about it all. Are there any last comments y'all want to share?
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Absolutely. It is an honor for us to try and curate these trips and experiences for people like you, and it's so encouraging, you know, hearing your stories and your takeaways. So this is absolutely the reason why we want to do this type of stuff. So thank you for the opportunity, for doing what you do and being willing to come on the trips. So I appreciate your guys' time. And with all that said, we'll start wrapping up for today. Thank you everyone for who's watched to this point. Please check out evokechangesoutdoors.org to learn more information about upcoming trips and how you can register to be a part of them. Well, thank you so much.